This is Bryson's car. It's a 1987 Mazda RX7 FC. He found it, traded an old dirt bike for it, drug it home, rebuilt the engine, kind of got it running, and then he left home. Bryson's off serving a mission where he does have a phone and he can access Facebook, but that's about it. His internet access is highly restricted and YouTube is not on the approved list. Bryson, look, I know you're not watching this right now, but someday I hope you will. And when you do, I hope you realize it's not really about the car. I mean, sure, the car's kind of fun and it's kind of cool, but it's really all about you. Love you, bud. See you soon. So, Bryson has no idea what's going on here. That's half the fun. I've been working on this car for about 18 months and I'm super excited to show it to him. I've been driving the car around myself for about a year, and mostly it's gone without incident. I recently had a run-in with the brakes where one of the lines that feeds the front caliper cracked. As a result, it was spewing brake fluid all over the front wheel and limited the ability to stop. Now that in itself is a huge problem, but it exaggerated what has been a minor problem for quite some time. The brakes have never had quite the firm feel that I think that they should have. So after fixing the line to the front left brake caliper, I tackled the master cylinder. I wasn't 100% sure it was the problem, but it sure seemed to be. Taking the old one out, putting the new one in really is not a difficult job. It's a little bit tight in there, but not terrible. I think the biggest challenge is getting a proper bleed. I did a bench bleed on the new master cylinder, so it should be largely air-free, but the likelihood of introducing a little bit of air in the line somewhere along the process is high. I have not bled the rest of the system, and yet the brakes are probably better than they've ever been. So I believe I will have some air bubbles. I'll let them work their way through to where hopefully I can bleed them at each of the slaves. But for now, the brakes are actually quite good. So look, mechanically, I'm feeling pretty good about the car. It starts every time, and now it stops every time. It runs well, it's fun to drive, and hopefully we're in a position where it's reasonably reliable. Last time I was tinkering with the car, I lowered the front end an inch. That, I think, improved the appearance of the car. It required from there an adjustment to the camber. And while that was a little bit difficult for me to digest at first, I've completely accepted it now. In fact, I quite like it. I actually think it looks good on this car, and it has bought me some space between the tire and the fender so that I don't get a rub when I turn and the suspension compresses at just the right time. As a side effect, by the way, completely unexpected, the steering is more responsive. I feel the road a little more, almost the way you might expect from a manual rack and pinion style steering, which I know a lot of folks adopt on this car. For me, if I want to drive it to the grocery store, I want to be able to one-hand it. So I like the power steering, but I also like the fact that now I get a little better road feel. It's not extreme. I don't know that the casual onlooker even notices that the camber is introduced, but I can see it. And it actually, I think, is quite fitting for this car. I think I need to do something similar now on the rear. Well, that's looking pretty good, actually. Interestingly, there is no camber adjustment on the rear wheels of this car. Even with the aftermarket coilovers, there's really no way to do that. The only way to do that is to buy some aftermarket parts. However, the good news is that the act of lowering the car naturally increases the camber. By dropping this about an inch, it actually did introduce some camber, which gives me just a little bit of clearance in here. It's tight. Like, I'm pretty nervous about it. And I ended up doing something I didn't think that I would. I rolled this section with a pipe to give myself just a little bit more clearance on the sheet metal that tucks up underneath the fender right here. Maybe that'll be enough. I don't know. I might actually have to bring the whole wheel in a 1/4 inch or so with a slightly smaller spacer. And I think that would be okay, but I do like this stance. And I think Bryson will too. That's what's more important. I've become somewhat hyper-aware of the minor bumps and bruises in some of these panels, especially the driver door. What's happening is that the finish on this paint is so matte-like that it hides pretty much anything. In fact, the texture of this paint job is almost like it was painted with a crayon. It feels kind of like a chalkboard. So I don't know who did what here. It's pretty bad, but it does hide all of the little bumps and bruises, and they are quite minor. But I fear that having fresh, shiny paint will bring them out in a way that will be a little too glaring. So as an example, right here, this bump is palpable, but otherwise I would say largely imperceptible. Again, because of the matte finish. With a gloss or even a semi-gloss finish on here, that will show. So I've got to figure out a way to identify all of those. So the idea is to start doing some sanding, probably with some block style materials, to make sure that we can identify all of the little recesses and protrusions and things that we can hopefully flatten those out. There are a few that are a little more egregious that need to be worked on. There's a bit of a cave in here. It looks like perhaps somebody lifted the car with a two-post lift and dented this right here. That might have been us. I don't even know. It's been too long. Similarly, back here on the back end of the door, there's a fairly substantial ding right here. Looks like it probably had something to do with some door interference at some point along the way. Overall, like, the bones are sturdy. The sheet metal's good. I haven't identified any material rust to speak of other than maybe some minor surface rust in a couple of places. So it's an act of attempting to get a degree of perfection prior to applying any kind of paint. So arguably I'm a little bit early to the game on this. I can't really paint until things warm up enough for me to get a viable painting temperature inside of a shop that isn't entirely insulated. So I'm a little ahead of the game on the sanding, but there's enough sanding that needs to be done that I think I might as well get busy on it. I am admittedly doing this a little bit out of order. Ideally, all of these other pieces would be removed. Bumper, blinkers, molding, cover the wheels, and I will. But for right now, I'm trying to maintain some drivability in the car as I feel out where I think some of the major bodywork needs to be done. So think of this a little bit more of a probe exercise where I'm touching and feeling to see where the work needs to be done, more so than getting the majority of the work done. These two areas right here and that one up there on the hood were the worst. And so I started with those and I've got them pretty close, but I know that they needed some work and I wanted to see, having never really used one of these block sanders before, what kind of flaws it would reveal. Very helpful. There's the blue. Blue is so much better than the gray. I don't know. Gray can look pretty good if it's done right. And I actually don't mind this tone of gray. It's a pretty good color, but it's done so poorly. People sometimes mistake this for the DeLorean. I know. You know, cut them a break. It doesn't look anything like a DeLorean, but because of its paint job, it kind of gives the impression of the DeLorean. Hopefully we bring that to an end with a different color. See, there's a spot that I did not even see or even think about. There's an obvious dent right here that the block sander revealed. Well, I suppose I've accomplished what I intended to get done for now. At some point, the sanding will begin for real. And at that point, the bumper comes off, wheels come off or get covered, the hood probably comes off. All those things need to come off to facilitate a good quality sand, and it'll be a mixture of power sanding and hand sanding. And really the power sanding should happen first. But I did want to get a feel for what I was looking at, and it is as suspected. There are really no more major dents to deal with, but there are a handful of little things that will need to be addressed, and they do need to be addressed because they show up and stick out like a sore thumb in a shiny new paint job. So we'll leave this for now, and there's not a whole lot exciting about sanding anyway. The excitement is the end result, and I'll be sure to share that with you. And if there are any little lessons or highlights along the way, I'll put those in a video as well. But that's all for now.